Give us the good, illicit, sordid stuff, though, because that's what I'm interested in.
Oh, well, our bank... I thought that about you.
Let's make this as smutty as we can.
Well, we do have our Bangor Casanova.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket is known for a lot of hot action, but not this kind of action. Love and lust, fire and brimstone. This summer, Jennifer Pictou started a new tour company in Bangor called Dawnland Tours, with guided walking tours of the Queen City's colorful and often off-colorful past. Last week, Jennifer and I hopped in her car and took an unusual tour of Bangor's famous Mount Pleasant Cemetery on Ohio Street. As we take a look at the history of saints and sinners in town, we started off with the saints buried there. Today, it's the sinners' turn. Also on the show, we'll recap what we've learned from western states about bear hunting after they went through the same kind of referendum the voters in Maine faced this fall. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Old Town Trading Post, Dysarts, EBS, and Napa Auto Parts. Let's jump right back into the show and jump back into Jennifer Pictou's car as we continue our drive around Bangor, past and present. We're just passing the Old Y and the Bangor Court, heading up Hammond Street.
Yes, and the Hammond Street Congregational Church actually, and I'll pull over here while I have an opportunity, the Hammond Street Congregational Church is on one of the stops on our Fire and Brimstone tour.
I just love the names you came up with. Let's go into the story behind this church.
The Hammond Street Congregational Church, actually one of the things that people don't know about it, just walking down the street, is that there is a cell tower inside the steeple.
No.
Yes, there is. And that's one of those really cool little facts that people don't often know.
And it's been there for hundreds of years.
It is. It's been here for a long time. It's survived a tornado. The original bell was thrown off, and they had to go searching for it. It was quite an interesting story. Of course, there's a lot that goes behind every church, every synagogue in the city, and part of our Fire and Brimstone tour is to bring out those stories that you don't really realize or really know.
So did this building host a lot of Bible thumping preaching? I mean, is that part of the Fire and Brimstone thing here?
Yes, Fire and Brimstone actually refers to that type of sermon where you constantly bring it back to heaven and hell, and you've got to make the right choice, or you're going to one place or the other, and we have a very eclectic type of worship base in Bangor, and it's actually pretty fun to look at. And some of the stories that go along with the Fire and Brimstone tour, like fires. You wouldn't believe how many of these churches have actually burned down in Bangor, but not just once, and it doesn't always go back to the Great Fire of 1911. There was a synagogue that burned, and one of the people associated with that synagogue actually took a fireman's hat and took a fireman's coat, put them on, and then went in to go save the Torah. I mean, it's amazing what people will do for their faith. And John Godfrey, who is a very famous character in Bangor's history, wrote a lot about the people in the churches. He had a lot to say. He was very opinionated, and we've had the good fortune to be able to really dig down deep into some of the things that were going on in the mid-19th century here in Bangor.
Okay, well, great. And so this would be Fire and Brimstone, mostly the hell part. If we went around to the Unitarian Church, that's mostly heaven.
Everybody's got their own opinion.
All right. Madams and murderers. How many madams did we have?
Oh, we had 2 or 3 madams.
Yeah.
And I say 2 or 3 because it's a little fluid in how the ladies actually worked. Some were very well known in town, like Fan Jones. She had a place, and we will go by that place when we get near to the end of our tour, and she really made a statement. Then there were others that lived outside the boundaries of Bangor, but you know the fluid nature of humanity, and when the lumbermen come into town, what isn't available right within the town's boundaries, they will step outside, or the girls will be sent in.
And murderers. I mean, there's a lot of celebrated murderers in Bangor's history.
Yes, and what we do talk about are murders that happened in the past, like Al Brady, who is you can't do a tour without Al Brady. I mean, you really can't.
No.
Of course, Joseph Junin, who was the first murdered person in Bangor. But then we have some lesser-known individuals, like the first police officer in Bangor that was murdered, and how that came about, and that he was also the first officer to be shot, and he was shot in the face, and it was very brutal. But it all stemmed from a domestic violence case.
Boy, some things haven't changed.
No, they really haven't. And, as the saying goes, those who don't pay attention to history are doomed to repeat it.
Okay, we have to make a turn at a busy intersection and head up Hammond Street. My guest and driver is Jennifer Pictou. She started Dawn Land Tours this summer, a series of walking tours of Bangor's interesting history and people. In fact, when this show ends, she'll start a walking tour of Mount Pleasant Cemetery on Ohio Street at 10 o'clock. If you've got $10 and time enough to get there, you can just make it. Or you can hang on a moment here, and I'll get Jennifer to explain how to take some of the other tours as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. I'm pleased that Jennifer Pictou has found time not just to talk with me, but to actually drive me all over Bangor right now. Try to picture what the Queen City looked like 100 years ago. The forest economy was booming, the Irish and other immigrants were flocking here for jobs, and there was a lot of sinners mixed in with the saints. Jennifer's Dawn Land Tours offers up this history with some simple walking tours. So how do people get tickets?
Well, we have made it very easy for folks to actually get tickets. And number one, you can just show up.
Oh, you can?
You
don't need a reservation?
You don't need a reservation for the cemetery tour, the Madams and Murderers, or the Fire and Brimstone. The only one you absolutely need pre-registration is required on is the Love and Lust in the Queen City.
Because you have a limit of 30 people for that. That seems to me to be a fairly substantial sized tour. How many guides do you bring with you?
We actually have one guide. To make sure that everyone can hear, we do use the waistband speakers.
Oh, okay.
And what we do is our tour is an hour and a half long, but we leave a few minutes at the beginning to just kind of get to know one another and just relax. A date night is all about having something different to do. And one of the things that I've listened to a lot in Bangor is we have a lot going on, but it's the same old thing.
Yeah.
Or we have a lot going on, but not everybody wants to go to this event or that event. It doesn't appeal to everyone. So date night was created as a way for adults 21 and over to have a very different experience with history in the city. We talk about the, I don't want to say affairs, but we talk about the love lives of Bangor's residents that you wouldn't normally know about. History is full of love and passion and romance, and we actually bring some of that out on this tour.
Give us the good illicit sordid stuff, though, because that's what I'm interested in.
Oh, well, our bank... I thought that about you.
Let's make this as smutty as we can.
Well, we do have our Bangor Casanova, which is our Hartson P. Crowell story. Some people know this from...
Hartson P. Crowell?
Hartson P. Crowell, yeah, he was in the Civil War. And some people have heard this story before, but he was married 4 times, but to 3 women. And he divorced his first wife and made her his 3rd wife, but he divorced his first wife, whom he had children with, and then he decided that he wanted to marry this younger woman, and then 5 days after he married her, he found out that she was messing around on him. So then he divorced her and then remarried his first wife.
Jeez.
And then divorced her again and married a 4th woman.
At this point, I'm questioning both of their judgments.
Well, love, the heart wants what the heart wants.
Yeah. Well, we have just crossed Union Street, and we're on 14th Street heading where?
We are headed back to Hammond Street.
Okay, great.
Now, again, with the Love and Lust, we also have uncovered a series of letters from a gentleman in the 19th century who was writing to his to-be betrothed, and he expressed a lot of love to her. But in his letters, he also expressed a deep, abiding love and sexual attraction to another man.
Oh. There wasn't a lot of that going on back then in public or even private letters.
You are absolutely right. There is not a lot of that is uncovered in letters or that was public at the time. And this is a very unique story that really transcends a lot of boundaries, because the lady was very understanding.
She'd have to be.
Yes, she did. Yes. And they ended up getting married, having children, and.
But the honeymoon was a little crowded.
Yeah, the honeymoon was a little crowded.
And by way of reference, we're just coming up on Union Street again, right next to the airport mall. Just coming out of the airport.
Yes, and I'm going to give you a lovely tour of the construction on Union Street.
Yes. It's been a lovely summer negotiating these exits and entrances. Now, as we're driving back towards downtown, you have a tour we haven't even talked about yet, and that's spectral photography. Spectral
photography, yes. That is actually at Mount Hope. And we're doing Mount Hope because of one particular story. Part of what we do is we also talk to paranormal groups and paranormal investigators. And there is a reported spectral carriage that can be seen at Mount Hope in one of the oldest portions of the cemetery. And I've actually spoken to a woman who said she did see it, she and her son both. I have never seen it. The superintendent of Mount Hope doesn't really know anything about it. It's one of those very interesting little mysteries, and I got the idea for a spectral photography tour because ghosts are pretty big right now. Everybody's watching ghost hunters on TV, and we have some very active paranormal investigative groups around the Bangor area, and everybody's looking for proof. So that's really where that started from, as a fun cemetery tour, talking about some of the interesting folk legends that were brought to New England, like vampirism and witchcraft, and really just give folks an opportunity to welcome them to bring their camera to a cemetery to look for things like orbs and mists and see if they can actually catch that spectral carriage.
Now, is this the kind of thing where you would only see it on camera? It shows up in the photo when you least expected it? Or do you actually see it in person?
Not according to the lady I spoke to. She said, I saw it with the naked eye. So did my son. We have heard from other people that this carriage supposedly exists, but like I said, I have not seen it. I'm hoping someone can catch it on camera. That would be a lot of fun.
Do you actually go out there yourself, just on your nights off, and say, hey, I wonder if I can see it tonight?
Well, one thing you need to know about Mount Hope is there is no light in that cemetery after dark. So
perfect then.
After dark, you're really not allowed in the cemetery. You're not supposed to be there because it is so dark, and it's just a hazard to walk around. As is any cemetery, because of ground settling and uneven nature of hills and running into monuments. That's a bad thing.
Yeah.
That's terrible. So what we're doing is our spectral photography tour is at dusk. So we're really catching that kind of low light level hour right before sunset, and that's why the two differing times. The first tour in October is a half an hour later than the second tour because of the changing times in sunset.
Exactly. I was wondering about that because I saw on your website the different times, and you're doing it in October, and I'm thinking to myself, when is sunset then, and why are you doing it at that time?
Now you know.
Yeah, okay. So you're saving that one for October.
Yes. There's a lot of planning that actually goes into tours. There's not only the research, but then you have to know the route. And you have to think about things like light levels and, areas of town that you may want to walk in during the day, but the culture changes at night. So you want to make sure that everybody has a really safe and good time.
Yeah. Yeah, since I lead birding tours, and some of the best birding happens in spring when there's daylight that lasts forever, some mornings I got to be up at 4 or 4:30 in the morning, and that kind of sucks.
That's terrible.
Yeah.
I don't even think my clock has a 4:30.
No.
I ordered one without it because that's just a terrible time of morning.
This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. I'm with Jennifer Pictou. She's driving, and she's giving me a quick sample of the history walks that are being offered by Dawnland Tours this autumn. One of them is coming up this Thursday night. The Madams and Mysteries Tour starts at 7. Info is online at dawnlandtours.com. Coming up, a secret tunnel under a famous church in downtown Bangor, and more ghost stories on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. We've taken the show on the road this morning. Jennifer Pictou of Dawnland Tours is in the driver's seat. We're sampling some of the walking tours in Bangor that reveal some of Bangor's secrets and secret places. We're coming up on one right now. We're just up to the intersection of Hammond and Union Streets in Bangor.
Yes, and a couple of the churches right here, one of them, you can see the great big spire coming into the sky, and that is the Union Street Brick Church, which reportedly has a tunnel that goes from the basement of the church down to the river.
Oh, really?
Yes, and the stories surrounding that church are that was possibly used as part of the Underground Railroad, and then we say, well, you also have to take in Prohibition at this time too. So it may be it may be actually more likely that it was used for rum running than slave passage.
Rum running coming out of a church basement.
Right.
This just gets better and better.
It really does, and these are some of the things that you'll find on our tours. Who was doing the rum running? Who was taking the whiskey and reselling it back to people that they took it from? We also have the Isaac Farrer Mansion, which is very haunted. We have the Hill House, which is one of the most famously haunted buildings in Bangor. And then there's even a haunting associated with the brick church that we were just talking about. So there's just tons and tons of history in Bangor.
Now, you say reportedly it has a tunnel under this church that's just to our right side here. Can't they find that out for sure?
Oh, sure. I just haven't been there.
Okay.
Yeah.
But other people say, yes, they've seen it. It is there. It goes down to the river.
Yes. People that actually do work in that church have said, yes, if you go down to this area of the church and you turn right or turn left, and I'm not saying exactly where it is, they say you wouldn't find it unless you were looking for it. We've seen it.
Now, does it come out of the other side somewhere near the Sea Dog, or do they know where it comes out?
They don't know where it's come out because they actually haven't been down through the whole thing.
Oh, come on. Somebody's going to have to do this.
I know. I want to.
Yeah.
I very seriously want to, and that's probably one of those mysteries that we will have to just find out for ourselves. Which I say, hey, I'm all for it.
And here we are on Main Street, just turning down, going by the Penobscot Theater.
Penobscot Theater is another very haunted place in Bangor.
All theaters are.
Yes, yes. This one really, in particular, has some very intriguing stories associated with it. One of the other things that I'm working on right now is I am working on a haunted Bangor book.
Oh, really?
Yes, and it's supposed to come out next summer.
Got a ghostwriter?
There are a lot of ghosts I'm writing about. That's very funny.
It was an accident.
No, actually, that was pretty awesome. So yes, and when I point out some of the haunted places in Bangor, even though we are not doing the ghost tour proper for Bangor, if someone has an interest in that, of course, we will accommodate that group. And the Charles Inn is another very interesting haunted place. So if you want to know some of these stories, you'll have to check back with me next summer.
Yeah, because you are putting together new tours, and we're probably going to have to do this again next year because this has been lots of fun.
This is a really great time. I enjoy it quite a bit. And of course, Central Street, we have the Al Brady murders.
Mm-hmm.
And when we talk about Madams and Murderers, we really want to make sure that people understand not only talking about the murders, but the people surrounding those, because the people that surrounded that whole Al Brady event, these were people who lived in Bangor, very prominent citizens in Bangor, and it really speaks to the high quality of resident here throughout history, that there's just so much in the background that happens that people don't know about. And those are also stories that we want to bring to the forefront so folks understand that, people who live in Bangor just rock. We do. We rock out loud.
And, of course, when we're right here at the scene of Al Brady's death at the hands of the FBI, you won't find any blood stains. You should know that Bangor tears up its streets every 6 months. So all the evidence is gone.
As evidenced by what we're driving through right now, tearing up State Street. I don't hold it against them.
No, got to do what you got to do. I mean, this is an old city underneath these streets, and repairs must happen. Okay, we're back on Hammond Street, and as we're heading up to our parking lot, why don't you tell us how people contact you once again? You're DawnlandTours.com.
Yes. Our website is DawnlandTours.com. Dawn, just like in the sunrise, and Dawnland is one word. So DawnlandTours.com. They can also call 404-4113. And they can also go onto our website to the tour calendar. And if you see a tour that you would like to go on, then click Make a Reservation, and you can pay for tickets right online.
Mm-hmm. And for these walking tours, you can show up.
All of the walking tours you can just show up to, except the Love and Lust in the Queen City. You must be 21 or older in order to attend that tour. And we want folks to make reservations ahead of time so we can pre-plan and make sure it's going to be a great night for everybody. And as we pass the Federal Building on Harlow Street, if I use my gesture to the right, and this is actually the site of Fan Jones's infamous house with blue chimneys.
Oh, is it? No,
yes.
Where the Federal Building is, or
across the street from where the Federal Building is, and this is very, very an interesting road, because now you have the diamonds right down the road here. So the sometimes streets just keep reincarnating themselves in different ways, but in the same manner.
Yeah, shows there's a lot of future in sin.
As you can see on our Fire and Brimstone tour.
Well, Jennifer, we've just come back to the Greater Bangor CVB Visitor Center. Thank you very much for the tour, and thanks for bringing a little history to Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on, and please come again.
Over the last two shows, we went to Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, 3 states out west that went through citizen initiatives to ban the same methods to hunt bears that Maine uses. So what did we learn from it? Well, if nothing else, it's more complicated than the usual sound bites you get out of every referendum debate. For another, there's a chance that Maine isn't anything like the states we keep getting compared to. Stand by. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. Over the last 2 weeks, Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine took an extra step that nobody else seems to be taking. This November, the Humane Society of the United States is trying again to change Maine's bear hunting laws and our actual management of the species. Proponents point to the western states that banned hunting with bait and hounds 2 decades ago and claim that everything is now better out there. But if you talk to the biologists in Washington, Oregon, and Colorado, you get a different view. A view that is not often explored in the current debate. What the proponents say about the West and what the West says about the West, doesn't exactly match up. There are common threads that ran through all three interviews, and there was some interesting divergence. For the rest of the show, we'll line up some of those points and see if we actually learn anything. Donnie Monterello is from Washington's Department of Fish and Wildlife and will speak for that state. Greg Jackal is biologist for Oregon's Department of Fish and Wildlife and speaks for the Beaver State. Jerry Apker is the bear guy for Colorado's Department of Parks and Wildlife. Let's start with some raw numbers. Maine has about 31,000 bears. Oregon is about the same, or almost, although the state is about 3 times larger. Washington, what do you have?
You know, we don't have a real good estimate number of bears. We have a what I consider to be a strong bear population in the state, but you know, it numbers somewhere probably in the 15 to 20,000 number. So that we have a lot of bears in the state. We have a lot of secure bear habitat, but we don't have a good estimate for exactly how many bears there are.
Colorado, how many bears?
Currently, we estimate that there's about 18 to 20,000 bears in Colorado.
So Maine and Oregon have about the same number of bears, although Oregon is 3 times Maine's size geographically. Maine has half as many again as Washington and Colorado biologists estimate in their own states. Simply put, Maine has at least 3 times more bears per square mile than any of the western states proponents compare us to. So it's no surprise that Maine needs to manage the species more intensively in order to prevent conflicts and avoid unhealthy overpopulations. In Maine, our harvest target is roughly 4,000 bears. In Colorado...
So last year, our harvest objective was right around 1,250 bears. We actually harvested 1,172. This year, our harvest objective is closer to 1,400 bears.
Washington State had to go through some major adjustments when its referendum passed, but even so, harvest targets are only about a third of Maine, in a state 3 times as large.
And so the hunting methods changed, which just means in Washington what we found is just success rates went down. Mm-hmm. We still harvest between 1,200 and 1,600 bears a year. We've had to make some changes over the years to still fall within the population and harvest objectives that we have, and so we tended to go to longer seasons, more or less expensive transport tag for bear to be able to still manage within those harvest parameters that are our objective.
That was a common theme from all 3 western states. Proponents of the referendum say the sales of bear hunting licenses increased dramatically after the referendum in each state passed due to an increased popularity of bear hunting. But the western states say that's not true. What really happened was that those states needed to encourage more people to hunt bears before they were overrun with nuisance complaints. Colorado.
I think the perception of most people is bear populations are more or less pretty stable over time, and they grow relatively slowly. But one of the things that we've learned is once the bear population reaches a certain momentum, then they can continue to grow at a pretty brisk pace if you don't have throttles back on the population. Right. And we had been managing very, very conservatively all through the 80s and 90s, and not until it was in the mid-2000s did we begin to change our management approaches and begin to try and throttle back on bear populations.
So how did you do that? Because this is after the referendum. This is
after the referendum. It was largely in response to incredibly increasing bear-human conflicts, which we can talk about in a moment, but also an acknowledgement and a recognition that all of the indicators that we used to try to monitor bear populations were showing that we had more bears. And then when we completed some studies that showed conclusively that we had much, much higher bear densities, at least in some of these surveyed areas in Colorado, than we previously assumed. I mean, on the order of 2 times as many bears as we had been previously assuming. Then we began to change our management approaches. And the way that we did it, the only mechanism that we had, and still have, was to increase licenses. And thus far, at least in the places where we've increased licenses, we have begun to show evidence of reining back on bear population.
Okay. I put the question more directly to each state. The website for the Humane Society of the United States says, quote, states like Colorado, Oregon, and Washington that have prohibited these practices via citizen vote have seen surging interest in fair chase bear hunting following the prohibition. Oregon?
I wouldn't say that there's probably been a surging interest in bear hunting in Oregon.
Washington?
No, actually, I think this is just my own intuition here. I don't. I think we probably had more interest in actually going bear hunting when we had the use of dogs and bait, where we had folks that were dedicated. They were putting together a trip to actually go bear hunting, and it was that time of year. Probably it wasn't associated with going out deer and elk hunting. I'm loading up and I'm going bear hunting for the week or for the weekend or whatever. Now, without those methods and those specific seasons for those two methods, now it tends to be, I'm getting ready for my deer and elk hunt. I'm going to grab the $10 bear tag or whatever it is, $20 bear tag, and just have it in my back pocket in case I see a bear.
But the answer we got from Colorado is a little different.
I think there's definitely been an increase in interest. I don't think that it's all of a sudden been something that it's not in the way we marketed it. It's simply that there is a greater awareness that there is a really vast resource here in Colorado. There was certainly much more information out in the news about bear-human conflicts and the number of bears in places. Aspen was featured in National Geographic magazine, and that kind of stuff raises people's awareness, and the sporting community is no different. They pay attention to that kind of stuff, and then when we were interviewed about bear hunting in Colorado by sporting magazines and whatnot, we certainly informed them that we have been trying to get increased harvest on bears in order to reduce the bear population in certain parts of the state, and therefore we're asking hunters to come out and enjoy the experience of hunting deer, elk, pronghorn in Colorado. And if you happen to be in an area where there are abundant bear populations, then we have a variety of licenses available for you to help hunt and enjoy that resource.
And there you have it in one paragraph. Despite claims from referendum proponents that bear populations aren't increasing in the West and that nuisance complaints aren't increasing, the western states themselves tell you differently. In fact, the nuisance bears in Colorado got so bad, they got national headlines, and that did indeed lead to surging interest in hunting bears in that state. Plus, proponents say the referendum increased interest in hunting bears, and therefore Colorado sold more licenses. Colorado says no, that they needed to harvest more bears, so they simply increased the number of licenses available. As it turns out, Colorado also tells us that it's a lot easier to see a bear in that state than it is in Maine. That is next, as Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine continues on Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. You're listening to Sports Radio 92.9 The Ticket. This is Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine. Over the last couple of weeks, we've been doing a little fact-checking. Both sides of the debate over this fall's bear hunting referendum point to 3 western states that have already been through this. Proponents say those states are a good example of what can go right if the referendum passes. Opponents say those states are a good example of what can go wrong. But nobody seems to be asking those states directly. So here on Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine, we did. We interviewed official state bear biologists in Washington and Oregon 2 weeks ago, and Colorado last week. Today, we're putting it all together, and the big question is, can you even compare those states to our state? Opponents say that Maine's woods are simply too thick to hunt like they do out west. Well, how do they hunt out west? What are the sight distances? How do you find a bear? Washington?
Well, they don't use bait or hounds.
Right.
So that only leaves one method.
Yeah, that's right.
The sheer luck of running into one, and then some of what you mentioned, the spot and stalk, just mostly in eastern Washington, just looking across ridges, glassing, and those kinds of things. But again, I think that's a smaller segment of our harvest. A larger segment of our harvest is folks that are just out deer and elk hunting or for other reasons that are in the woods, and they just happen to stumble across a bear. So it's very opportunistic.
Oregon.
Certainly in some parts of Oregon that are more open, in the northeast corner of the state, and some parts of the state in the southwest where there's a lot more open habitats. You'd probably hear from hunters that they enjoy that type of hunting where they're spot and stalking bears in open timbered habitats, so they can glass open ridge lines where bears are out feeding in the springtime and in the fall.
So you can see for miles.
Oh yeah, you can see for very far, and spotting scope, and there's days you can see upwards of 10 bears a day, and then pick which one you want to go after.
Oh, no kidding. See, in here you're lucky to see one from under 100 yards.
Yeah, and so there's definitely parts of Oregon like that on the Coast Range where it makes it very challenging, to find one because of the timber cover. So that would make it more advantageous to have either, hounds or bait in order for you to properly identify the sex of the bear and make sure it's not has cubs or stuff like that.
So Colorado, is hunting there like hunting here?
It would be very, very different kind of hunting in Maine versus Colorado. And in Colorado, if I know that there's a really good chokecherry area in the fall, and I can sit up on a hill a quarter mile, even as much as a half mile away, I could sit there with a spotting scope or even binoculars and glass that area and watch and look for bears, and then work my way in closer and try and get a shot. I suspect that there are relatively few places in the woods of Maine where you could sit a half mile away and glass an area and even have a chance of seeing a bear.
Well, it seems like proponents of the referendum compare Maine to Colorado more often than any other state.
I know a lot of people have said, well, Colorado's done it, so Maine could do it too, in terms of prohibiting this, and life would go on just fine. Well, I think that depends on what you are going to define as just fine life. I think in terms of managing bears, I think it would tremendously complicate how the state has to approach managing bears in Maine, because just because of that plant type and terrain type difference that exists between Colorado and Maine. And so I think that's where comparisons have to stop.
Unfortunately, that's where comparisons start, not stop. The claim that Maine's forests aren't that different from the West. If you ask the West, they all disagree. They say that sight lines are very different out there, sometimes being able to see for half a mile or more. Oregon can see up to 10 bears in a day. Can you picture any circumstance in Maine like that? They also point out that food resources out west are very different and bear movement is very different. Again, Colorado.
Hunting conditions in Colorado plays a big role in how well we achieve our harvest objective. And I think that's probably something that might be a little bit different than Maine versus Colorado. Our forage conditions tend to influence to a great deal how successful bear hunters are. In other words, if forage conditions are natural forage conditions for bears is relatively poor, bears move around a lot more in Colorado looking for food, and during that process then they become more vulnerable to hunter-harvest, and harvest tends to increase and success rates increase. And so we monitor what the forage conditions are like during the course of the year, and that helps influence how many licenses we set. Bears will move down out of the high country, even living, nearly at timberline, and then move down to the low-lying valley areas and begin to exploit what we call oak brush acorns, which are really, really small compared to eastern acorns. But they'll forage on those acorns, and then they'll forage on chokecherry and hawthornberry and serviceberry. Typical, they're really well-known western-type berries, but non-existent back east.
That's something else that Maine doesn't have. Berries. By the time Maine's hunting season starts, most of the berry crop in our state is gone. Raspberries, blackberries, blueberries, most gone by Labor Day. And as Washington State says, that matters.
It's one of the things that you guys have that we don't is the fall mass production. Our state is dominated by coniferous forests, not hardwood forests.
Yeah, exactly. And that's one of the difficulties I think we face is that we don't have a big berry population, which Colorado seems to rely on for their September hunt. For us, it is the acorns, the beech nuts,
right.
And those are spread out all over, so it's hard to find a good concentration to say this is where the bears are going to be.
Right.
Still, there are some valid comparisons that opponents might want to overlook. In the coastal regions of Washington and Oregon, the woods are arguably as thick as Maine's, and hunters do harvest bears there, mostly while hunting something else. That's what proponents say Maine can do. That's what opponents say Maine can't do, and as evidence, they point to the fact that we have plenty of deer hunters in the woods, but only about 7% of our bears are taken while the hunter is actually searching for something else. It's an open question about whether we'd have more bears harvested by incidental take if the more efficient methods were outlawed. Washington says incidental take picked up after the referendum.
A lot of those are just incidental folks that maybe in past years before the initiative when we had the use of dogs and bait, we probably had a higher the average black bear hunter was more interested in solely going out seeking bear only, and then we faded away from those methods after the voter initiative, and we tended to scale our seasons and our opportunity and our tags more associated with incidental bear harvest. We have a large number of deer and elk hunters in this state, and we see a tremendous spike in bear harvest now associated with opening day deer season, opening day of elk season. When those deer and elk hunters now, they have a tag in their pocket because it's less expensive. We kind of hit that price break where I might see a bear, so they buy a tag. And just the sheer number of deer and elk hunters out there on opening days, we harvest a significant number of bears.
So there you go. Maine hunters could learn to hunt like they do out west, harvesting some bears during the opening day of our elk season. That actually is a problem. We might have more incidental take of bears if we had more game species putting hunters in the woods. Maine's big game consists mostly of deer and bear with a very limited availability of moose. Maine has to rely on those three species to keep its famous corps of registered Maine guides employed. How does that compare to the western states? Colorado?
We have, I guess it would be pretty much the whole suite of big game species, with the exception of, say, grizzly bear and caribou. We have deer, both whitetail and mule deer, and then elk, moose, pronghorn, antelope, and then sheep. There's Rocky Mountain sheep, and there's desert sheep, and then, of course, black bear and mountain lion.
Washington.
We have a couple different species of deer. We have mule deer, black-tailed deer, white-tailed deer. We have elk. We have black bear. We have cougar. We have bighorn sheep, mountain goats, moose. Trying to think if the list goes on there. I think that's most of them.
It sounds
so
like
those are the big game hunted species here.
Oregon?
So we've got Rocky Mountain elk as well as Roosevelt elk. So Roosevelts are on the Coast Range of Oregon, kind of the Cascades in the western part, and then Rocky Mountain elk are in the eastern part of the state. We have mule deer, black-tailed deer, which is kind of on the western part of the state in the Coast Range, and then a part of the Cascades. Let's see. We also have pronghorn antelope ranging through the kind of the southeast part of the state, the desert, kind of the part of the Great Basin extending into Oregon. We also have some whitetail populations in kind of the northeastern part of the state. And we do have a few moose kind of coming in that northeast part of the state too. So we don't have a lot of moose habitat, very limited, but we do have a few moose coming down from Washington and Idaho.
Yeah.
So
Any bighorn sheep or anything like that? Or?
Yeah, so we have bighorn sheep. We have California subspecies and Rocky Mountain subspecies bighorn sheep, and then we also have Rocky Mountain goats in a few areas of Oregon. So we got quite a bit of everything, a little bit of everything.
You have mountain lions, don't you?
Oh yeah, we have mountain lions, good healthy population of mountain lions.
The point of today's show is to help listeners decide for themselves if Maine really is like those states out west to which we are so often compared, when in reality neither side of the debate actually spends much time explaining the comparisons. In the long run, it may not even matter. Maine voters may decide that they want to ban Maine's traditional methods of bear hunting for non-scientific reasons, for ethical reasons. There may even be some ethical hair splitting. Proponents point to the decision made by Colorado voters to ban bear hunting with hounds as a proper ethical decision, but neglect to mention that it's still okay and apparently ethical in Colorado to hunt cougar with hounds. Voters in Maine may fully understand that we will have more problem bears if the referendum passes, but that they're willing to put up with the consequences. One thing is for certain, if you compare Maine to the western states, after voters in Colorado, Washington, and Oregon banned the use of bait and hounds, other laws soon had to change too, as the unmanaged bear population began to wreak havoc not just on humans, but also on other prey species in the forest and crops. Washington and Oregon start the bear hunting season in midsummer, August 1st. Washington.
And so one of the things that we did, anticipating that the bear harvest would go down, significantly without the use of dogs and bait, because the success rates are higher with those two methods. So what we did is we increased the season length, along with that change I mentioned about the price of a transport tag. So now the season starts anywhere, depends on the area, but it starts somewhere between August 1st and September 1st, and then runs to November 15th.
Oregon even began a spring hunting season for bears. In that state, bears are subject to being shot just about any time they are not hibernating, except for a brief period in July. Ironically, a little-known fact about the debate here is that if our referendum passes, the actual language that nobody ever reads would also ban Maine from instituting a spring season here, even if the bear population gets completely out of control. In every case, the 3 western states made it easier and cheaper to shoot a bear. And in every case out there, each of those states have Sunday hunting, something that might become necessary under Maine law if all other options are closed off by referendum. One last question. Would Maine landowners even allow hunting on their lands if it included longer seasons and Sunday hunting? Over a third of the land in those states out there are public and open to hunting. In Maine, the percent of public lands is less than 10%. Colorado.
We're 35% public land, if I think, counting Forest Service and BLM land. BLM is Bureau of Land Management,
Right.
which doesn't exist in the eastern United States at all.
No, we don't have that in the East. We're almost all private land. Much of the little public land we do have in Maine includes Acadia National Park and Baxter State Park. So the effect on landowner relations and the effect on the rural Maine economy needs to be discussed too. But it isn't. Maybe we will on another show. Somehow, this would be a better debate if everyone did a little more fact-checking. Bob Duchesne's Wild Maine is brought to you by Hammond Lumber, Old Town Trading Post, Dysarts, EBS, and Napa Auto Parts. You'll find this show and all previous shows on the web at 929theticket.com. And you can bet a lot of people are going to want to share this one. Join us next Saturday morning at 9 a.m. on Sports Radio 929 The Ticket.